Hi everyone, Paisley here,
And this is Dr. Crow.
and today we are making a video on ageism, just joking, ages in Civ 7.
Yes, this is one of the most controversial new features of the game, and it's also one of the most controversial topics for historians.
This video, we're disaggregating Civ switching from ages, which we've already done a video on, and we're focusing on this idea of what are ages, how do we periodize the past, and we're going to take both the perspective of the game developers, but we're also going to discuss about how we periodize in the field of history and why it's controversial even there. And interesting enough, in this household, we disagree on the periodization of ages in Civ. I think it's the first time we kind of disagree on something here.
Yeah, divorce.
Divorce. No, let's see how this goes. It'll be a friendly debate.
Hopefully you will not see a college student crushed by logic and facts.
What is that a reference to?
Ben Shapiro.
Let's start off with just the general description and speculations of what the ages are in Civ 7. They're split into 3.
So we have the Antiquity Age, the Exploration Age, and the Modern Age.
And I think the question everyone has is, what are the time periods that these ages cover? In some cases, it's clear, in some, not so much, right?
From what we know from the videos we've seen so far, Antiquity for Firaxis begins with agriculture and ends in the year 400 AD. Exploration appears to go from 400 AD to, we're not exactly sure, but it seems like around 1500 to 1700. We're not quite sure.
We're basing this based off of the civilizations we've seen revealed so far. And the Mughals was kind of a big hint to us on that end date. I don't think we know much else about that transition period, except that they did say in the video, the modern age is a period of incredible technological growth and global conflict where mankind goes from the development of steam engine to the splitting of the atom. We thought it would be the industrial era, but the Mughals are kind of hinting it would be slightly earlier, 1600s or so.
What we know about civs in the modern era so far is we have Britain and French Empire. Britain is 1707. French Empire is Napoleon. So again, those are later. So Mughals would be kind of pushing it earlier. French Empire, if you're calling it empire, is pushing it later. Meiji Japan is also pushing it much later because they're talking about 1860s at that
And
point.
same with Buganda, right?
Right. And so they tried to do a kind of thematic thing with each age. So for example, in the Antiquity Age, they really want to kind of explore how agricultural societies are developing, building up urban centers, and forming the foundations of the first empires and large states.
And actually, in their first blog post, they are addressing this question of why ages. And their main reasonings are going to be gameplay reasons. People aren't finishing games, they're not getting to that modern industrial era tech tree.
They're getting bored.
They're getting bored.
Moving units around.
Keep in mind that they're not approaching this first historically, but they are using historical justifications and sort of inspirations. So for Antiquity, what we know from the developer live stream, the gameplay on September 12th, is that ideas like the Silk Road, Pax Imperatoria, the Great Library, and the wonders of the ancient world. These are sort of the win conditions of the Antiquity era. These are the themes that inspired the creation of this age.
Right, and we know from what they've said that for the Exploration Age, they will be opening up a new continent, so they really do want to do this kind of overseas exploration.
Yeah, and I think this is a bit of a change from previous civs where eras kind of meant not much. There were kind of points in the tech tree. They corresponded with maybe units and the civ bonuses, but they didn't really dictate the pacing of the game.
Exactly. I mean, in Civ 3, for instance, the leaders, they change their clothes, but mostly the game stays the same.
And here they are breaking it into a 3-part narrative, which of course is the classic way of writing. So, I mean, I see why they've done it. It's for gameplay reasons. It's just better writing. But historically, the world, the past, was not divided into 3 parts. So let's get into a little bit of my gripe with the system, and you can defend it if you would like. So yes, you just cannot divide the past into 3 parts and say this applied historically throughout the entire globe.
But let me give a counterpoint. The reason why we use periodization in history is because otherwise history would just be recounting in this year this happened, and this year that happened, and this year that happened. Periodization makes a claim for us. It gives us a narrative to history. Sometimes that claim can be very strong, like in Marxist history, or it can be very weak. Antiquity, medieval, early modern, modern. We don't really mean anything except for old, middle, new, but they give us a kind of claim so that when we say, oh, this is a modern idea, a modern concept, we kind of have a base for understanding each other.
Okay, well, counterpoint. The terms early modern to modern, and then maybe even pre-modern, they are, of course, rife with problems. It's very teleological. It takes the modern point as the endpoint of all of history. It's like saying people in the past were always working up to the modern. Sure, it's problematic. But antiquity, exploration, and modern have nothing to do with each other. Do you know what I mean? They're not even in the same sort of plane of time. You know, no one
Right.
says I went from antiquity to exploration. There's just,
Right. That's not a term historians use, as far as I know.
well, here's the interesting thing. Exploration age, I think, has a common understanding, which is going to be era of Magellan, but it doesn't seem to be the one that Civ is taking. Because when we saw that the date 400 AD is the beginning point, we kind of had an aha moment that exploration here is referring to this new trend in history that the height of exploration happened in the year 1000. And it's a book by Dr. Valerie Hansen, which I tweeted about, and Andrew Johnson.
Not the
And
president.
right, and Dr. Andrew Johnson, the senior historian, liked that tweet. So I think we're on to something.
And I will say, Dr. Hansen's book is a controversial book. It's making bold claims. And it's interesting that Firaxis is going down that route because it's really staking out a kind of bold new path for Civ. Essentially, her argument is that in the year 1000, with the expansion of the Norse moving from Europe to the Americas, and with, for example, the Polynesian expansion moving all the way to New Zealand, Easter Island, Hawaii, that at the year 1000, it is now theoretically possible for an object, an idea, a word to travel across the globe. So this is now, for her, the first global epoch.
Right. And she's not the only one that has made this argument. I think it's a contentious issue, but one that is currently in discussion, which I think, okay, now I'm going to flip my position. I think it's really cool that Firaxis is making a stake in this ongoing conversation in the field of history. And they're not just taking what has already been settled 50 years ago and has now been unsettled as their point of reference. You know, when we look at the Civilopedia, a lot of times they're referencing books from 100 years ago. Of course, the field of history is ever changing and ever growing. And so I actually like that they are maybe including themselves in this contentious conversation. I think it's a little risky and a lot of people will be a little confused, but I love that they're going to be teaching people about this new way of thinking about exploration. If we are correct. I mean, we could just be
We could be
totally
wrong.
wrong.
Yeah, I know Ed Beach did say Exploration Age is about the Spanish conquest of the Americas. So that's kind of putting it back in that old school historiography. But we'll see how it goes.
We have hope in you, Andrew.
We have hope. Again, think about how boring it would be if the ages were early modern and modern. You know, I mean, what do you even say about that?
Yeah, which I think is interesting that maybe for the developers, early modern is modern,
Right. Another
right?
bold claim.
Another beautiful, bold claim. I love it. I'm changing my mind as we
Wow,
speak. Yeah.
wow.
I think we're going to see this shift in definition of the modern era belongs to the beginning of colonization, right? The crisis of colonization is an ongoing issue and it belongs to our era, not the exploration age.
Right, I think that makes sense. If you think about what persists from 1500, which seems to be kind of their starting point, you have the origins of capitalism, you have the origins of colonialism, you have Middle Passage, Columbian Exchange, genocide of indigenous peoples, all those crises continue into the present. So it's kind of making it seem like the crisis of the exploration age kind of continues into modernity.
Right. Which is, I think, a much better way of framing it than if they had the Industrial Revolution as the beginning of the modern era, right?
Right.
Because so much had led up to that point in the 17 or 1800s. Again, if they're going to do this, I do like that they're making really bold, risky claims in what they're defining the eras as. It shows me that they've thought a lot about it. But it gets me to my third criticism, which is it is very much limiting the sandbox model of Civ, right? It is their vision of the eras and you play within it, rather than something in the background and doesn't really have much consequence. So I always just kind of said, oh, well, I don't care that it's the Renaissance era because that doesn't make sense for the civilization I'm playing. I'm just going to ignore this term and just play my game. You can't really do that here. Do you have any counterpoints?
That's true, but I think from both a gameplay perspective and a narrative perspective, that there's a famous book by Hayden White, Meta History, where he talks about how history always has a kind of narrative to it. Maybe it's comedy, maybe it's tragedy, maybe it's irony, but there is always a kind of narrative aspect to the telling of history. So I think the way they're doing it here, it is limiting in a way, but it's also kind of giving that greater sense of history as a story.
Yes. I think, my initial reaction was a little bit surprised because I never thought they would double down on ages because the field of history is kind of really moving away from periodization because, these terms are so loose, they don't have much meaning. But to see them double down on it was kind of a bit of a shock. But I think I can be persuaded that it can be useful. I would have done something completely different. Here's my idea because I really hate time. I would have made every civilization have its own calendar because that's actually how it works, right?
Isn't that more limiting though?
No, because you're getting more immersion because we really need to break out of this idea of like time is set, the calendar is set, dates are set. Like we can change time if we want to. We don't need to go by the calendar we have today.
Okay, so Civ 8 abolish time.
Yes. But wouldn't it be so cool if like you play the Mayans, you have the Mayan calendar
That's true. And
as
in
the time
2012,
and then it's over.
your game's over.
Or like, the Chinese calendar, the Persian calendar, or like how did they do it in Babylon? Each king, new calendar. Right? So that's what I wanted to see. I guess I'm just disappointed that I'm not seeing that.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll see that in Civ 8.
Yeah, but until then, thank you for listening to our little bit of ramble rant. We are at the height of the academic period, but we will try to keep putting out videos whenever we can. And we look forward to hearing all your comments below.
See you.
Bye.